Yeah. Okay, welcome everyone to the Platonic Academy of Melbourne. Autumn 2024, Plato's Republic. We've got someone at the door. Thanks, Steffi. Have you got the pass? Yeah. Plato's Republic, part 2. Oh, yeah, we're coming. No worries. Where's my clapboard? Platonic Academy of Melbourne, Autumn 2024, Plato's Republic, Part 2, Week 3, the analogy of light, the divided line, and the allegory of the cave. So this is kind of like the greatest hits week. Yeah, because we held over the divided line and the analogy of light. So we're doing it all together. And, you know, looking at my notes, I think we can do it. I think I remember last time we got behind, and this week we could do it. So there is a lot here today. We did the preparation in the discussion of forms. What are forms? You know, how do they relate to sensible things and so on? And maybe we got a bit confused, but anyway, we've got that out of the way so that now we can have a go as best we can. Maybe we're not prepared for these very strange this very strange imagery, I guess, or unusual imagery we get about what is our reality and, yeah, how does it relate? What is the underlying reality under our sensible experience and under our experience of our mind's eyes and so on? And we have Bruce and Chen Yu. So, guys, come and sit down. And I've just turned the video on, just introduced, and just watch, there's a cable there. Oh, no, can't they sit here? I reckon they could sit here and then they're on screen and stuff. Yeah. Guys, come sit here. I think that's probably best.
We'll sit wherever you're comfortable.
Oh, okay. Right. Oh, you want to write notes? You want to? Yeah, off you go. Off you go. If you want to write notes, that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Okay, and just wave the cameras there. Just wave and show your face to Ellen on the screen. Now the cameras. So you need to lean in a bit.
Move it a little.
Yeah.
Hello.
This is Bruce, and last week Ellen Shen Yu came along, so I think you met him as well.
Yes. Hello.
So maybe in the break we'll introduce Bruce. But I might just keep going now, okay, if we're all settled. Okay, all right. So as I said, this is kind of the greatest hits week, and Bruce is the sort of person who just buys the greatest hits album and doesn't buy all the back issues. Yeah, I know your type. Yeah, so we've got the analogy of light, the divided line, and the allegory of the cave, and yeah, so quite heavy stuff, but I think we'll get through it okay. All right. Now, before we get started, geometry is on Saturday and Sunday in 2 weeks' time. So the weekend after next, on the 11th and 12th of May, in this building, we're going to be in the activities room, and it's quite topical, really, because today we'll get to Plato was saying, well, you know, geometry is the gateway.
Have some posters if people want to have places they think.
Oh, to put posters up.
If
Okay.
anyone can put up like the philosophy department of a university or a church or
anywhere
anything like that, where you think that Platonists might hang out.
Okay, we got that. Yeah, or maybe budding geometers or something. So it's hands-on geometry. We talk about introduce a bit of philosophy and introduce some various simple diagrams, and you actually learn with a compass and ruler. You learn how to do old-fashioned geometry with the compass and ruler, which is quite fun. And we do color things in, and you know, we have a bit of fun. It's not too heavy with the maths. If you don't do maths, don't worry about it. And thank you, Jem, for making those posters. That was a surprise for me today. That's a nice surprise. We've also got, if people can help, if anyone knows places to put our standard postcard or these posters, that'd be great, because we're trying to revive or start our promotion. Because we're getting less students, actually. We're disappearing. We've got 2 lovely new students here.
Jason. We didn't have you on board then. so-
No, that's right. It's all winding up. So that's weekend after next. And the weekend after that is the Saturday, the 18th. The Saturday is the 18th. And in Doncaster this time at Lenny's house, we're having a little salon. So for you guys who haven't been before, every term, towards the end of term, we have a little meeting at someone's house. We have afternoon tea and someone gives a talk. And Martin Black is not speaking anymore. He pulled out. He actually had something else on. So I announced that actually that Martin was speaking. And so I asked Effie with maybe the Myths group could give us a prelude to the myth of her, you know, that we're going to do in the course. And she said no. And she said, oh, what about Confucianism and Platonism? And I'm thinking, who would present something on Confucianism and Platonism? I don't know. Would you know it all, Shenny? I think she was trying to dob you in.
Oh, sorry.
She was trying to dob you in.
Sorry, I didn't even realize. Who else would be into computer? I need to meet this person.
Yeah, well, let's talk about it later. But really, it could be just introducing a bit of a discussion, and it could be fairly, these sessions are fairly light and casual, but we do have a gap. We could do some myth stuff, but it might be really interesting seeing you guys have just arrived, just to sort of, you know, give a bit of perspective on it. I'm really interested in the connections with Taoism, which appears in my book. By the way, I haven't shown the book to this class. This is my book published in 2018 when we started the academy, and if you want it, it's $20. Yeah, I've got a bit in about this. It's all about the interesting stuff for me is about Leibniz and his talking with the Jesuits and the interesting stuff that the Jesuits were looking at in the the late 17th century and early 18th century, before it all really got closed down. All that accommodationism got closed down, and you weren't no longer allowed to sort of find some sort of universal Christianity, as they called it. But that was happening back then. Yes. Yes,
Bernie, what's the title of your book?
Enthusiastic Mathematics.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So it's you can find it on Amazon. I self-published through Amazon. So.
Okay.
At the end of the year, Alex.
All right. Okay. All right. So let's get going then. We ready, guys? Ready? All right. So, bit of introduction. Socrates proposes that philosophers should be rulers. They should be these guardians, right? Okay. But then last week, as we said, he's done a bit of talking about it. But then he said, well, look, I haven't really defined what a philosopher is. And to answer these questions, we got into, as we did last week, with the theory of forms and how forms can participate in sensible reality, and how in our sensible reality, the essence of that reality, the higher being, if you like, of that reality, is in its formal construction. So a philosopher is one who loves to observe the forms as the essence of being. So this is about, you know, as we've already come to, and we'll see it again today, turning the mind's eye around to look directly at the forms, as he calls it. What the hell does that mean? Well, we kind of do it in geometry, really, don't we, all the time? And it's not really a problem, as we shall see. But then there is a higher sort of reality that's more difficult to understand, that we come to today. So then last week, remember, he said, well, the trouble is that, you know, these philosophers should be rulers because they're the ones that know the true reality, and they can model society on that reality. And if they're trying to make a good society, they can model it on the higher good. But hey, you know, there's hardly any philosophers around because the philosopher's nature gets corrupted by society. Okay? So the question then is, well, how does this happen? You know, this is a bit of an aside, but it does inform what we're doing here. How does this happen? Plato answers this allegorically, right? He says, well, it's a complicated story. And it's probably best to answer that not with a reasoned account, not with logos, as in an account, to give an account, but to actually present an image. Remember that Greek word icon, or whatever it is exactly, where we get icon from. Present as an image, usually translated as an allegory. I'm going to present you a picture. And the picture he presents is the first analogy or allegory, which is the ship of state. Remember the ship of state we got last week, where there is this ship and there are these groups on the ship trying to wrestling for control of the ship, to navigate the ship. Meanwhile, those people who are the best at navigating, the so-called stargazers, and this is kind of associated with philosophy because they were into astronomy, the stargazers who know how to navigate aren't really interested in navigation. It's not the thing they're into. They don't want to get into power. It's not a big thing for them. So that's what happens in a normal society, and perhaps in our society, he's saying, especially democracy, Athenian democracy. Then to explain how those youth who have the potential to be the best navigators, philosopher rulers, are corrupted, he uses then another analogy, which is the beast, the beastly crowd. Okay. So there are not many who know how to navigate, and we're jumping metaphors here, that navigate the ship of state, because those youth who have the potential to be the greatest navigators, philosopher rulers, are corrupted by their sophistical training. So we might remember from the introductory course or wherever else, this, when a young man wanted to get on in society, you know, in this democracy, which was a democracy of aristocratic men, you know, but it was a democracy of them. But when they wanted to get on in the courts and in the Senate and whatever, they needed to speak well, to persuade, right? So they went off and got trained. Rhetoric, sophistical training, the training in rhetoric and sophistry that was popular at the time, they would get caught up in that. And of course, because they're talented folk, they would be caught up in it and do very well at it and be supported and so on through this. And in this training, the potentially, the talented potential philosophers learn not to focus on the truth, but how to appease the beastly crowd. Say something that gets a clap, you know, say something that everyone pats you on the back for or whatever. And so they learn how to appease the mob, to say things that please people. And so by pleasing the beast, they are distracted from the true reality of the forms. So you imagine, you know, we've talked about it in courts, it's all about persuading the jury to believe you. It's not actually so much about the truth. You get distracted from the truth. And same in politics. It's like getting people on side to re-elect you, you know, and you get lost from the truth. So this comes up in Plato all the time, and this is where he's presenting it, and he's presenting the crowd as this beast, this big, heaving mass of people that has all these emotions and everything that you're trying to placate. So this corruption that we see in normal society brings back, as he keeps saying, the importance of cultural education, of nurturing the guardians in a healthy environment, so that they don't get distracted in this way, and that they turn their gaze to the forms, to the pure forms, to truth, and not to persuasion and the mob and so on. Hence the importance of education. So the discussion then returns to the selection and education of the guardians, which and remember there was all that stuff about the virtues that need to be nascent in the youth, girls or boys, and then be nurtured and through the education. But then at the end of that, Socrates starts talking about the ultimate goal of this education. The ultimate goal, the great lesson, the megista mathemata, the great learning, or the great mathematics, if you like.
Which section?
503E. This is greater than justice, greater than the form of justice itself, even greater than all forms. We might call it the principle of forms or the forms of forms. Here it's called the form of the good or just the good. Everything else is useless without it. So those people who've done a bit of Neoplatonism, of course, can see how important this is for the Neoplatonic higher reality, higher truth, the higher one. At page 506E, Socrates says that the form of the good is what every soul pursues. Right? It's a bit weird. The form of the good is what every soul pursues. It's only that people get misdirected, that they don't know what it is and think it's something else. Remember, we see that from Gorgias and in other books. So it's like we all really, Norman, how are you? We saved a seat for you up here, mate. Oh, you're going to go there?
Okay.
No one's obeying me tonight. Everyone's just sitting where they want. There's too much liberty. You know what liberty leads to? Tyranny. I'll start being tyrannical next. Oh, anyway, that's good. Okay. So where were we? We're building up to the ultimate good, the form of the good. So every soul pursues this. It's like we all really want it, even if we don't realize it. Remember, he's saying everyone wants to be, he says elsewhere, everyone wants to be good, right? And once they know, once they have the knowledge, they will be good. They will be virtuous, whatever that means. Okay. It doesn't immediately mean, being altruistic or whatever else like that. It doesn't necessarily mean that. That's what we get from Plato. That's what we get from Christianity and so on. It just means when you know the good, then you will do good, you will be good, and you'll direct your life towards good. It's just that most people don't know it. So what we need to do is get the guardians to know it. And listen to my language here, because it's a bit contradictory. So Socrates says that they must know this. And then he says that I can't say what it is. He refuses to say what it is. Is it right for someone to talk about what he does not know as if he did? Says Socrates. Glaucon. Well, sure. You can't say what you don't know if you don't know it, but you can say what you believe as what you believe. But if I try to say what is as what I believe, I risk giving opinion for knowledge. I risk confusing opinion for knowledge. Glaucon protests after this kind of haggling for a little while. For heaven's sake, Socrates, don't stop when you're so close to the end. And Socrates then relents and he kind of says, well, I can tell you what is the offspring of the good and what most closely resembles it. Okay, remember that part there? What? So I'll just do a little aside here. Why is Socrates so reticent? And we touched on this a little bit when we were talking about the forms last week. So it's partly dramatic effect, I guess, isn't it? It's like, wow, we're up here and then, wow, I can't tell you directly. But soon Socrates will explain his reticence in other ways. If it is the source of all knowledge, then it can't be something that is known. If it's the source of all being, then it can't be another being. It must be beyond them both. And importantly here, it must be unknown. If it is the principle, if it is in principle unknown and unknowable, then how can one say what it is? If it is the form of every distinction, everything that we distinguish, you know, whether it's a thing or a concept or whatever, if it's the form that they all take, then it would not be just another one of them. It would not be just another form, because that would also be in the form too. Remember, I tried with Nicholas of Cusa, maybe it doesn't work. He said, the sky is not other than the sky. The cup is not other than the cup. Justice is not other than justice. Whatever you wanted to find, that is clearly true about that. And he's pointing to the form, right? That same other form. If everything that you can name has this form, then naming the form only presents another particular in that form, just another example. So when you name it, you immediately violate it. You just make it another example. But if you name it and pretend that you're naming what is unnameable, you risk taking opinion for knowledge. So that's one way of understanding this. And as we go on into the education program of the philosopher, we will see that this is the way Plato is thinking. But you probably have to take my word for it at this point. So only distinctions can be named. Anything I name or refer to must be distinct, for it is nameable. But here we want to name the very form of all that is distinct, which is impossible. If it were nameable, then it would be just another distinction, another example, another expression. Therefore, the form of all distinctions, of all that is nameable, is unnameable. Now, another way people put this, and you see this in other traditions, where they say that it is every name and it is no name. Because it's every name, because every name is an example. Every distinction that is named is an example of the form. But it's also none of them. I might call it same other. I might call it God, not God, or good or something. But it's also bad. It's also justice and also something else. So I'll leave that at that. We can discuss it more if you're having problems with that. Otherwise, we can pass it over. So there is a problem anyway of exposition that Socrates is pointing to. Socrates has committed to saying not what is the form of the good, but what he thinks is its offspring and what resembles it most closely. And when people do use a name, right, that's what they're trying to do. Same other, good, God, whatever. And even with this lower aim, Socrates says he needs to answer by presenting an image, an allegory. Okay, so remember earlier he was using them because he thought they were better, right? But here he's using it because he has to, because he's going beyond what is nameable. Presenting an image, presenting an allegory to point you in the direction, right? So before he had this thing where he said, well, okay, you know, like I can use logic, I can use reason, I can use an account, but it's like, you know, you need to have a compound creature like a stag goat. Remember you used that idea of a stag goat, like two animals joined together. Logical argument, playing around with logic and words and reasoning, but also images. This is the way I'm trying to point you to what is unnameable. Consider if it's not like, it is not like logic can prove anything outright. I mean, even in a way, Aristotle agrees with this. Logic is only about ordering and organizing what you think you know. It does not necessarily challenge your assumptions or hypotheses, right? And that's what, you know, when we get later, Plato's going to saying you've got to smash those hypotheses. You've got to smash those, even those most fundamental habits of your thinking, you know. So logic has its limits. Language logic has its limits. It's not what philosophy actually is about. So we've discussed this last week. We've discussed it before. Language logic only, for Plato, only gives an account in language of what is known in the senses, right? Or it might be talking about the formal reality, as maybe a mathematics textbook does. What we observe with our mind's eye, what we turn our mind's eye to see more or less clearly. So language has that relationship with what we know at higher and lower levels. Thus, here in this section of the Republic, we are going beyond the form of language to show the source of knowing, which is beyond naming and beyond explaining in the ordinary sense. So some people use the distinction between showing and telling or saying. You get that Wittgenstein, you get that in other traditions using different language. Showing with an image and telling or saying is like naming. We can't name it. The image Plato presents here makes a giant leap in thought. It presents a shocking image. Suddenly we just go into this image, right? Where did it come from? What's he talking about? Of the true nature of reality in relation to our sensible experience. It presents a complete reversion of attention. And for this reason, logic on its own is not going to be enough to get us there. Notice how this is not attempting logical proof at all. He just jumps into, imagine this. Imagine a line. Imagine a cave. You can take it or leave it. It's up to you. He's giving you something to meditate on to help you voluntarily take it up or reject it. You're not going to win a debate on this. You're not going to go into a debate at university with the analytic philosophers and say, there you go, I proved what's in the cave is true. But the injunction here is to turn the mind's eye around and try to see by analogy, by showing what Plato is talking about, what he's pointing to. So this is the key source, one of the key sources of Platonic mysticism, a key source of what would later be called the negative way, well, at least the basis of the negative way, or the apophatic method, the method of denial. The higher principle can only be given by what it's not being, not knowing, invisible, unsayable. But if I can give you something that is very close to its universality, then you might be able to leap forward to it. Or if I can give you an image at the way that things are structured at this higher or elementary, we can think of higher or lower, at this elementary level, then you might be able to make the leap. We can only show what emanates from it, and so what expresses it by example or analogy. This is important because this is one of the foundations of Platonic mysticism right through the tradition. Hellenistic, Christian, Islamic. If you talk to these chaps, talk to them about the Islamic tradition, which they are hopefully, which Bruce is hopefully actually going to show how Platonic it actually is. Okay, so it's here. This is one of the first sources we get of this in a written tradition. It's in the mystics. It's in the mystery cults, we think. We think where a lot of this came from is in the mystery cults. But this is our first written source. The form of the good is no particular thing, nor a particular form. If you think that it is particular, or you think that it's distinct, then you have certainly missed it. As the source of knowledge, beyond knowledge, it is strangely not knowledge. It's unknown. Even if I were enlightened, I would not know the form of the good. I never could. So I would not know in that sense of knowing as being able to give an account of it. Yeah, I'm getting to what I'll do is I'm just kind of summarizing where we're heading, and then I'm going to introduce the sunlight analogy, and then we can stop for questions and a drink. And then we can do the allegory of the divided line,
Mhm.
and we'll have another break, and then we'll do the allegory of the cave. All right. Okay. But thanks for asking. I probably should have said that at the beginning.
I think it would be.
Yeah. Okay. So to summarize, good governance by Plato's ideal state would be assured if its philosopher rulers had a clear view of absolute goodness. A lengthy program of education will aim to bring their mind's eye to see this source of goodness clearly. But it's not going to be easy to teach this ultimate lesson because of the difficulties of rising to the elementary truth. This is how the allegorical account of the hierarchy of being and also the hierarchy of knowledge and opinion is introduced to the discussion as an approach to an orientation towards this ultimate mystical non-object of education, the form of the good. And so we now come to the sunlight analogy. And the sunlight analogy will go right through this. So we're starting in the visual sense. Remember, vision is used, and that's what's called enlightenment. Because of this, we're using vision as the analogy. And then he'll step in and say, well, okay, we're using vision, but all the senses. This is true. But we're using vision and we're using the sun. So what I'll do now is just get the slides up and just introduce that. And then I've done quite a bit already, so we can have a bit of a chat about that, and then we'll have a look at the divided line. Okay, so let me get this share screen up. Is that not on there? Someone see share? Oh, there it is. It's highlighted. Okay, grab that one, and this is for Alan, and Alan, hopefully you will see my slides there, but I need to start at the beginning. Scream out, Alan, if you don't see our slides.
Oh, I can see it, thank you.
Oh, good, and scream out if you can. That makes me feel a lot better too. Okay. Oh, whoops. All right, so here we go. So the sense of sight is the overriding analogy in the Platonic Enlightenment. In vision, there is the observer, the eye, and the observed, the visible things. Okay, so observer, observed, the eye looks at things, right? In vision, the visible world is lit by the sun god. So he says here, remember he says here, he uses this as an example because, you know, we don't have the equivalent to the sun with touch and with smell and other senses. But of course, maybe with modern physics, we might see it differently. But anyway, so he says there's the sun and sunlight, you know, and that's totally necessary, right, for sight. You need light. Right. So the visible world is lit by the sun god, and so he plays the role of supreme divinity in this analogy. Just as the sun is to things visible to the eye, so the good is to the invisible forms seen by the mind's eye. So that's on page 508. Just as the sun gives the ability to see things, so the good gives the ability to see the forms. You couldn't see any forms if it wasn't for the good. The good is the principle, one way, you know, we might put it, is the principle, the underlying necessity of all the forms, right? So it's a form of forms in a way. It's like the sun. It has this fun elementary role. Notice that the form of analogy or analogia is used here. Okay, so remember the other meaning of logos, because we're now coming to that other meaning of logos. So we've got logos as meaning giving an account, logos in language and speech and that sort of thing. It's connotations on logos, but here it's in this. It is ratio, okay, relational ratio. Okay, and analogia is in the same ratio. So the sun is A, well, actually, I've got it down here. You say A is to B as C is to D. Okay, so you might say 1 is to 2 as 6 is to 12, you know, the double ratio. Or 1 is to 2 as 3 is to 6. Sorry, there it is there. Better use the one on the screen. So the sun is called a 3-term proportion, a 4-term proportion. The sun is to things just as the good is to invisible forms. Okay. But then on page 509b, the analogy is extended to the being of things seen. Okay, so now, first of all, it's kind of like knowledge, right? You know, seeing is like knowledge, but then he talks about being because he says, notice with biological life, right? It needs the sun to grow. So if you're looking at a tree, you need the sun to see the tree, but the tree also needs the sun to be life. Remember life, animation, psyche, right? Zoology, psyche as well, life. So it's got both aspects, knowing and being. So that comes in 509b. That's important. He's introducing that for his analogy because he wants to bring being in. He wants to bring ontology in as well as epistemology for those people who like those terms. So this good is the source of being and knowing of forms, but it is neither. The good is beyond being and knowing. Therefore, it is deeply, deeply mystical. It's this deeply mystical source that all the mystics aspire to in their various ways in Christianity, Christian, Islamic, Sufist, whatever else, described in different ways. It's that sort of thing. It's this mystical source that we're aiming at. Now, he then introduces the divided line, but before we go into that, let's break for mint tea and any questions, comments, or reflections. Should I keep that up on the screen or should I just take it down now so we can see on it?
So the good is for all invisible forms, but not all invisible forms are good as we use the term good in our language. So the word good has a different.
You just use the word good in 2 different ways.
2 different ways.
Oh, there you go.
Sorry?
Yeah, I think that's exactly the point.
Yeah.
You just use the word good in 2 different ways
Yeah.
in one sentence.
So this good, let's use a capital G just because it's close to God, capital like the sun. The good God is the form of all invisible. But can we say that it is also, the good is also what makes invisible forms exist? Because the sun is what makes the tree grow?
Yes, that's what it's saying. Yes. So, you know, you have that problem in monotheism where you say God is all, God is good, so therefore God must also be not good. You know, you say God is all, so God must also be not God. So how can God be all? And how can God be not God? You know, there's a bit of a contradiction there. So that's one way in which you're unable to name the source of all because because there is always another and an opposite when you make a distinction. Okay, how are we going? I usually can't do 2 things at the same time. So did I do everything right? That's for you. Okay, who hasn't got it? Oh, okay.
Is it got one in it?
Yeah, any more.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else?
Thank you very much. So the Bible is a term good for all invisible forms. One good, like, what's the Greek word it uses?
Oh,
Do you know?
Agathon.
Oh.
Agathon, yeah. Yeah, as in, you know, the character in the...
Well, see, that's got a different meaning in modern Greek to ancient Greek. So in ancient Greek, it's good. In modern Greek, it means innocent.
Right. Oh, interesting. Yeah. Well, I wouldn't worry too much about the names. Yeah,
Only because when you hear it, you don't think of the invisible forms of including the not so good invisible forms, like fear as a form or anger as a form. Because it's everything, right? It's all invisible forms,
yes.
not just justice but injustice as well.
Mm. Well, in a way, in Plato, with this, all is good, and that seems even bad, right? So, you know, that's where it is kind of contradictory, right? And you know, this does come back to, you know, the island and the sea, in the sense, you know, for there to be good, there must be bad, right? But the good, the bad is in the good, right? For there to be an island, there must be the sea. The sea is in the island in that sense, in being its otherness, right? So we are making distinctions here. You say good, you're worried about the name good, you know, how does it relate to any other form or whatever? Don't worry about that.
But again, we're using the word good here in different ways.
Mm.
We're using the word good as a relational concept between good and bad. But the good
Mhm.
is unspeakable beyond comparison, beyond in a way of relating to something.
Mm.
It doesn't, well, the good in the capital G doesn't relate to the non-good. Is that right? Because
Totally. Oh, okay. Well, no, it's a source of both. It's a source of both.
I'm using
Even shadows are in the light. And if we didn't have the eyes that came from like the light, we wouldn't be able to see shadows either.
Right, that's very good. Thank you.
Thanks, Norman, for that.
Norman.
Even the shadows are in the light. Just for Alan, I might have missed that. Even the shadows are in the light, and if it wasn't for the shadows, we couldn't see
And
the
if
light.
it wasn't for the eyes that we got from the
Yeah.
light from the sun,
We would.
we wouldn't be able to see
Yeah.
shadows either.
Yeah, I mean, Saint Augustine's got some really nice passages in his stuff on Genesis, and one of the ones that one of the things that he says is that, you know, he talks about Genesis, let there be light, and he's saying before there was light, the distinction of light, there wasn't darkness. There wasn't darkness before light, but when you got light, you got darkness.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the earth.
Oh,
Oh, no, sorry, it was on the face of the deep.
okay. So that seems to contradict Augustine or my interpretation. So darkness was there before.
I don't mind contradictions.
Yeah.
I don't mind.
Yeah, I think that's what yeah, right. So there is darkness before the light. Okay. In that story in Genesis.
Yeah,
Yeah.
doesn't
Okay.
mean that there wasn't a beginning for darkness. Doesn't
Okay.
mean that the darkness is beginningless, because in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth.
Right. Okay.
I think. My
Okay.
interpretation.
Yeah. Let me get the quote. Anyone else?
It reminds me of this sort of Vedic prayer. This is perfect, that is perfect. Perfect comes from perfect. You know that one? Yeah. So he's basically saying that all invisible forms, everything that exists is from the agathon, the good.
Who's saying that?
Better.
Socrates. That's what we're reading, right?
Well, he's saying you can't name it.
You can't.
I could call it God. I could call it shit. I could call it anything.
But he calls it agathon. It is good. It describes.
But what we've just been through there is that it's unknowable. It's beyond being and it's beyond knowing. And we're giving it a name because all he's talking about is what is closely related to it, or what is its closest offspring. So, you know, your challenge is really unfair, I think. After all that effort to say you can't name it, and then you're saying he has named it. He's saying you can't name it. Form of the good is just a nice way to point to it for him.
Would it be nicer, easier for us modernists to think of it as the ultimate as opposed to the good?
That's also a word.
Yeah, it's a word, obviously.
Yeah.
And you know, maybe
The absolute or something.
yeah, the absolute, something,
Yeah.
something like that. We think of good in a very moralistic
We do.
sense.
Well,
He's got a
yeah,
meaning
that's
that may not have had
Yeah.
that, may not have been there 2,000 years ago.
I think it's important that it is a God. Like looking at the different, I've got 4 translations. And I got a little bit of a problem with the Desmond Lee translation. In
Yeah.
the bit about the sun when where are we? Oops. Bit about the sun. When Desmond Lee translates, which then of the heavenly bodies do you regard as responsible for it? Whose light would you say it is that makes our eyes see and objects be seen most perfectly? In a footnote, he says, Plato says, gods, he believed the heavenly bodies were divine. He should have just left gods in the original. Which of the gods?
Well, that's why I
Yeah.
say sun. Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
somewhere I was saying sun.
Yeah.
So sun is a god. Yeah.
This is 50. This is 508. No, sorry,
509B.
9. Hang on. No, 5. Hang on. 508. 508A. 508A.
Which one of the and what was the what did you think should be translated differently?
Oh, there's definitely which of the gods, I think. Yeah.
What's wrong with which of the gods? Say it again.
Um,
Which of the gods? What's wrong with that?
Nothing's wrong with it, and I think that Desmond Lee is trying to shy away from it, even in the nature of the sun. He doesn't want to admit that Socrates could think that the sun is a god.
Oh, totally. All right, fine. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, he's definitely saying, yeah, which of the gods? The sun's a god. It's it's a really important astronomical god.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But likewise, I think you can also kick it upstairs and talk about one as being as much a god as it is anything else that can be named.
Yes, that's good way of putting it. And just getting back to what Tim was saying, which was, I think, really helpful. It's interesting to go back before Plato with Philolaus, the Pythagorean, and so he was a generation or two before Plato, and to Anaximander, which we've just got fragments of, where we seem to find that there was another name, and the name was Eperon, which meant unlimited. Unlimited.
I think a lot of confusion would disappear if we had something that in modern times.
Yes.
Because the good is a terrible term for us moderns.
Yeah, because it has that moral thing and a suggestion that you have to be altruistic and unselfish and everything.
Yeah.
Whereas that wasn't at all for them. They were thinking like, yeah, maybe what's good? Oh, the good life. Well, it's actually good to be a tyrant because then I can tell people what to do and that'll make me really happy.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, we have this association with some moral thing that is not necessarily in the individual's interest. Who wants to have a go at making the divided line here? Well, come on, Norman. It's a game with blocks. Okay, Alan, how you going? Do you have any questions or comments, mate?
Not at the moment, thank you.
Okay, there's 2 layers to it. It's kind of not really. There's 2 layers to it. Yeah, so
sorry.
it's 2 layers, yeah. So it's the first cut and the second cut.
Yeah.
Bernie,
Yeah.
I like what Abraham Lincoln said once. He said, better to remain silent and be thought a fool than to speak out and have the fact confirmed.
Better to be silent than what? What was that?
Better to be silent and thought a fool than to speak out and have the fact confirmed.
Right. Very good. Okay. I think we're nearly finished over here. I'm just going to read out Augustine here and what he says and see if people agree with this. So, and God, he quotes Genesis where it says, and God divided the light and the darkness, and God called the light day, and he called the darkness night. And he then does a commentary on that, and he says, it does not say here God made the darkness, so maybe I misquoted him here, because darkness is the absence of light. Yet God made a distinction between light and darkness. So too, we make a sound by crying out, and we make a sound by not making a sound. Sorry. We make a silence by not making a sound. So I'll read it all again. It does not say here, God made the darkness, because darkness is the absence of light. It's the absence of light. It's the other to light. Yet God made a distinction between light and darkness. So too, we make a sound by crying out. We make a sound, right? And we make a silence by not making a sound, because silence is the cessation of sound. Still, in some sense, we distinguish between sound and silence and call the one sound and the other silence. Okay, so it's another way of looking at how when you make a distinction, you create the other. The other appears. Yeah.
He's really trying to avoid making God responsible for evil. Not all forms of monotheism are like that.
No.
I
No,
mean,
but this is
in Kabbalistic Judaism, there is a side of God that you might also call kind of bad, and the pre-Columbian Mexico and Nezahualcóyotl school, yeah, God's kind of as much bad as he is good almost.
Okay, so I need to respond to that because I don't want any confusion to be introduced here. Augustine in his Christianity, his Platonic Christianity here, does not deny bad, right? He certainly denies evil as a positive force. Now, he was converted from Manichaeism, right? Where you have these two forces, which perhaps came from a lower level Zoroastrianism, but we can certainly argue about that. So you have those two forces, right? And he was against that so much that I remember when the kids started saying, I remember the first time someone said, all is good. I thought, oh, they're quoting Augustine, because he will have, there's some good quotes on this from him. He will say that the bad is the absence of good, or like a corruption of the good, right? So he's not denying it, but he's seeing it more in this way, right? That you create the positive, then the negative also appears. All right, how did we go with the divided line? Okay. Okay, so it's been changed. Okay.
I think it's strange that you've had the longer signs for the.
Well, who knows what it is? Who knows what it is? Who knows? You don't know which is which. But anyway, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
Maybe can that be seen by the camera? Maybe not. Where should we put it? Want to put somewhere? Effie? All right. Let's go somewhere where some people can see it. All right. Well, maybe just for the group, and Alan can see the screen, so that is fine. All right. So page 509E, this starts. Plato expands on the imagery by introducing geometric proportion in the line to depict this analogy. Okay, so we're still on share screen, hopefully there. And here we go. So just as shadows of visible things are to visible things, so geometric diagrams are to forms. Now he says, a line of arbitrary length is cut into two unequal parts. So just two unequal parts. He doesn't say, you know, in what proportion. He just says it can't be 1-to-1. Two unequal parts. And then each segment is divided again in the same ratio. So do we understand that? We've got it divided. I've got the large divide there. And then obviously, because they're unequal, one of them has to be smaller than the other. And there's a second divide in each segment. Okay, in the same ratio, logos ratio in that sense. This gives two pairs of segments in the same ratio on each side of the initial division to support the analogy, which is just as images of things are to visible things, so geometric diagrams are to insensible mathematical forms. We are asked to first consider how things are resembled by their shadows and reflections. In the same way, geometric diagrams resemble their insensible geometric form. Okay. So again, we've got a four-term proportion here. So A is to B as C is to D. So we're saying this relationship is the same as that relationship. So we know the relationship between images and visible things, right? Well, use that to try to imagine, conceptualize the relationship between geometric diagrams and insensible mathematical forms. Okay, so what are we talking about here? We've talked about the circle, but let's talk about something else here just to get a picture of this. Now, have a look at this diagram here, which we do in the geometry course. It's one of the first things we do. It's very simple, right, to draw. Believe me, compass and ruler, you won't have too much problem drawing this. Okay, see the square in the center that's divided into two triangles there, okay? It's got two triangles there, right? And we've now made another square on its diagonal and count how many triangles are in that square. Okay, so there's 4, so it's double. Okay, so have a look at this square in here and see if it's the same size as this square and the same size as this square.
Yep.
Okay, and can we see that if we add the two squares on the sides together, it has the same area as the square on the diagonal. So we go 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, oh, sorry, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So the square on the diagonal is double the square we started with, and it's the same as the sum of the squares on the side. The square on the diagonal is the sum of the squares on the side. Now, in primary school or wherever you did mathematics, that's the way it probably Pythagoras' theorem should have been presented to you, but it usually isn't. But anyway, this is used in the Meno. This is using the Meno for where Socrates explains that all learning is remembering by bringing over a slave who doesn't have any education but can speak Greek, and they draw images on the sand. And basically, Socrates is leads or guides. He's the midwife, whatever you want to say, where the slave works it out. Which, in this way, if you think, wow, in a square, the sum of the squares on the side equal the square on the diagonal. Perhaps that happens with all rectangles. You've worked out Pythagoras' theorem. You can work it out by almost by mere inspection, right? Now this works any size. Notice there's no measurements. There's no inches or centimeters or whatever else. This could be a pyramid here. This could be as big as a pyramid. This could be, has anyone seen the geometry of when we were doing this stuff in COVID? We looked at viruses. Oh, there's some amazing geometry, you know, Platonic geometry in viruses. It's just incredible. This could be the size of a virus. It doesn't matter. It works anywhere in any example. It will always work. It'll always be like that. Okay. So the geometer, as he's saying, the geometer's not worried. Where does he say that? The geometer's not worried. You know how geometers make use of the visible form of their diagrams. I'm just paraphrasing from 510 DE. When they do so, they're not concerned with the visible diagrams themselves. They're concerned with what they resemble. the square itself, the diagonal itself. In other words, these diagonals are visible things too. And like the other visible things that you can make images of or see reflected in a mirror. Okay, so we did it with the circle. This is an example that Plato will use in the Meno, and that maybe even here is suggested when he's talking about here. But so that's to give you a bit of an idea of the analogy he's trying to bring. He's saying just a geometric. He's saying visible shadows and images of things, geometric diagrams and their forms, and then he generalizes, he expands it out, right, in a couple of ways, right? So one of the first ways he does that, he says, just as with the sense of sight, so with all the other senses, right? And so with all things, not just geometric diagrams, all things, right? So this is interesting. Just as reflections of visible things are to visible things, right? So that's the Huon River. That's a beautiful picture I took of the Huon River. People, if no one's ever been down to Franklin Huon River in Tasmania, let's go there. Black water, beautiful reflections. Anyway, they would have seen reflections like that. They would have seen this in their time, you know. They had mirrors as well, shiny metal. They would have seen that. That would be their photography for them. So geometric diagrams are to invisible forms. So the image of things are to visible things as geometric diagrams are to their insensible mathematical forms. Okay? Now, something really interesting happens here. When he says that mathematical images, or geometric diagrams, when he says geometric diagrams are to insensible things, and then he says, well, geometric diagrams, remember where he says geometric diagrams are also sensible things, visible things, aren't they? They're also things. So then he introduces, he takes us towards a three-term proportion.
Mhm.
Just as images are to visible things, so visible things are to forms, like a geometric ratio, like the double ratio. And this is the form of analogia as a continuous analogia in Platonic mathematics. This is the key analogia, the logos that goes on. And that one of the principal ones is the double ratio. As 1 is to 2, so 2 is to 4. So the middle terms have been, if you like, brought together. So instead of having 4, 2 separate things, like 3 is to 6, as 1 is to 2, or 3 is to 6, as 12 is to 24, or whatever, it's a continuous thing, right? He's brought it to that. And the geometers who are reading this text can also see another hint of that in the line, which has now been deconstructed over here. And I'll show you how it is. So we've got the visible and we've got the intelligible. Okay, we'll start to use those terms. I'm jumping ahead a bit there. The visible and the intelligible, right? And we've got reflections are to things. I'm not going to be able to hold this together, right? As geometric diagrams are to forms, right? Now, you remember he collapses it.
Mhm.
And look here with the geometry. You notice something about these two here? They're exactly the same.
Mhm.
No matter where you do your initial cut, no matter where you put your initial cut, if you make the same ratio happen again, in the two sides, these two in the middle will always be the same. And that's what he says in the words. It's what he says in the words. He says, actually, geometric diagrams, well, they're also things. And this is the way he brings it. This is one of the ways he brings it all together and says, okay, so you're thinking about geometric diagrams related to their form. think about all sensible things as being related to their form in that way. So I'll just quickly, if people are a little bit interested in the mathematics, we needn't dwell on it here. It's very simple. You can start wherever you like, and I'm just using whole numbers here, so it's easier. Just imagine you actually, I will say you can start with 3:6. So you got 3 centimeters is to 6 centimeters is your first cut. In the 3, that's double, right? So within the 3, you have to have the same ratio, 1:2. In the 6, you have to have the same ratio. 2, double 2 is 4. What's happened? That is the same as that. No matter how you do it, it will always turn out that way. Okay, so this is one of these sort of hidden bits of geometry, sneaky little things that Plato will put in that suggest, a bit of a chuckle probably for some ways. All the people in the academy go, oh, I know what he's talking about there. For all those geometers that don't know, they don't see it. Okay, what else do I need to explain? Okay, yeah, so it stands for all the senses, right? So we're no longer talking about just seeing, we are talking about all senses, all sensible objects, and not just mathematical diagrams. Okay, so ratio, logos, and analogia is proportion. All right.
You need the word mathematical?
Oh, you don't there, do you? Good point. Yes. Yeah, that's a slip. You should have removed that. Okay, that's on the recording. Maybe I'll remember that. Well, you would do it early on, right? But you wouldn't do it here.
Got C and D, you had under D.
Yeah, right. Okay. Once you've got it into 3:10 proportion, you wouldn't use it. Yeah. Oh, thank you. You guys are on the ball. I just put that in to see if you'd pick it up. All right. So that's pretty much it, I think, for the divided line. There's a bit more that we can talk about in the discussion. Another sneaky thing that is truly incredible that we can talk about. Okay. Tim.
The divided line as proportion. Okay, that's just a simple mathematical concept. But what is it telling us about? Is it actually saying that is just a way of making it nice to think of the relationship between the visible and the unknowable? Is it trying to tell us that it is in that ratio, or is it just trying to show that these things sort of fit together?
It is in what ratio?
A direct proportional 1:2 double ratio.
No, it's not saying double ratio, and that's what I'm not saying either. It can be any ratio at all. It can be any ratio at all.
But what is the relevance and importance of it being a ratio?
Well, for me, it's really important. For anyone who reads the mathematical textbooks or Plato's mathematics, it's really important. And especially when you look at Eudoxus's work in the academy, where he gave a new theory of proportion, which comes in book 5 of Euclid, which is pretty much all Eudoxus's work, where there was an attempt to say that geometry is all about relations. It's all about ratio. So geometry is all about ratio, and our reality is mathematical, ultimately mathematical. And so it's appropriate in the analogy to use ratio and analogia to illustrate what he's talking about.
But the world is fundamentally mathematical. That's something you just said.
Yeah.
I got that right.
So they invented mathematical physics that we now use, right?
Sure.
They invented mathematical astronomy, and then you go and see Archimedes and stuff. They moved on to mathematical physics.
Which is absolutely fabulous. And
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
But does it describe the world?
Does modern physics describe the world?
Well, yeah,
Oh.
I mean, anything,
No,
whether
you're
even
not.
this maths or that maths back then, or modern high-powered calculus now, They are ways of looking at the world. But is the world actually mathematical, or is it that we have a mathematics that we use to try and approach what the ultimate reality is, the good is, is that another tool?
So objective science, how do we want to talk about it? Materialism or objective science is this idea that you can have an objectified world, right, that you observe without having an observer. That's one way of seeing it, right? And then you say the observer who's independent from that world, right, imposes their mathematics on that world to organize a collective, to make classes. Oh yeah, we'll call that two, and and so on, right? And that is exactly the opposite of the Platonic position, right? The Platonic position flips that over. He says you've got I, an object, right? And he says that the object, right, is an expression of the forms that the I, the observer, already knows. So going back to the baby thing, the baby's born, white noise, the baby uses the form of the same, for example, we call it same, we call it aperon, we call it whatever we want to call it. We call it the same. The baby uses sameness, right, and otherness, difference, right, to organize its reality with Plato. Now, its reality is generated from its experience. The baby only experiences itself. The causation might come from outside, but the baby only experiences itself, right? And so the baby only has the mathematical forms or sub-mathematical forms, the foundations of mathematics or whatever. It only has that to work with, according to Plato. Plato says in the Phaedo, must have learned it in another life, whatever else. For us, we just need to say the baby's born with it, uses it to organize its reality. The position you're presenting is a very different position, the position that Plato rejects, right? And the position that rejects Plato, which says you have these minds, these independent minds that go around and observe this reality out there. It's like, some people say, an eye in the sky, a godly eye in the sky over this independent reality, right? And you use your mathematics, then where you get it from, to observe it. But what Platonists would say, or what phenomenologists would say, or a lot of critics of that will say, it loops around. It always loops around, because wherever you start, right, even if you say brain, right, it loops around. What's your brain? What's something you observe? Or whatever way you want to go, it always loops around in a self-referencing way. So this independence thing, you can never establish it. But it's a nice, easy one to do for science, isn't it? And to explain science. And it avoids lots of problems of subjectivity and so on. So it's good you brought it up, because that's exactly what Plato is not saying. Saying turn the mind's eye around and see it completely the opposite way. We've lost Effie.
No. I was lost before.
Lost and now found. Oh, gee, haven't we got much time? All right, well, God, we've got to do the cave, eh? We've got to do the cave. Okay, let's do the cave. All right, so does anyone want to start with the cave? What happens? What happens? Where are we? We're in a cave, right? Norman, you're in a cave. You're looking at these guys. Where are your arms?
Tied behind my back.
And you can't move your head.
Can't move my head.
Yeah.
I can only look straight ahead. I can only see the shadows of things, including presumably my fellow prisoners.
No, I don't think you can't see them seeing. You can't see them seeing. Yeah. You can't turn your head so you can't see your fellow
Can I
prisoners.
see the shadows of my fellow prisoners?
Oh, you see the shadows of them. Okay. Very good. Yeah, but not them. Not
Not
them.
them.
Yeah.
And the shadows of, this is a strange, these kind of like models of trees and animals and physical and sort of entities, like as if we're like got stage props or something, as if we're somehow in a cabin underneath an a theatrical auditorium. And people keep like carrying, these models of trees and tigers and
Butterflies.
and things, yes.
Right. Okay. So
Along a pathway,
yeah, there's a
which
pathway.
is between me and a blazing fire, which is casting shadows in the back of the cave.
Okay. So thanks, Norman. That's great. So we've got a fire. We've got a fire here, right? And we've got this pathway and people walking up and down all these statues and things like that, shapes. And so Norman's sitting there with his mates, can't see each other. So can't see each other seen, but you can see their shadows. That's a good point. You can see the shadows and then you can see their appearance, right? And then you see the shadows of all these things behind, right? And then what happens is Norman stands up. Oh, it hurts. It hurts to stand up. And he turns around. And he sees what's going on. Well, actually, first you don't see. It's all a bit. Yeah, it's all a bit crazy, isn't it? Yeah. Eventually works out what's going on. And then the other prisoners, at this point, the other prisoners think he's gone a bit mad because he's saying, hey, they're shadows, they're not yeah, it's all coming from over here, guys. It's all coming from over there, And they think he's mad. So that's a first step. And then he gets dragged, forcibly dragged. Norman gets dragged up out of the hole and into the light, into the sunlight. It's dark. No, he's gone. And then he comes back and we think he's totally mad, right? Okay, so he goes out into the sunlight and there's a process. So I think I can jump in here and say that this is describing a process, a journey of enlightenment, of being enlightened, right? Okay, and so he goes out, and so this is like turning the mind's eye around to see the forms, but he can't do it straight away. It's just going to look at night, and then maybe adjust its shadows first because his eyes, he's never been outside, and his eyes just don't work. But after a while, he can train himself to see things, to actually look at things, trees and everything, objects in this reality. And then eventually, he can turn and look directly at the sun. Okay. So that's the first stage. He becomes enlightened, then returns to the cave. And then at first, he's all confused. He's all confused because he can't see anymore. His eyes have been adjusted to outside and he's blinded. So there's two forms of blindness, remember? It's two forms of blindness. One of them is when you first turn towards the forms, you don't see much, right? And then after a while, you start seeing them. But then there's another blindness, which is when you come back to looking at sensible reality, or ordinary reality. And at both stages, your mates, your colleagues, your fellow citizens, think you're quite mad. Yeah, it's probably pretty much it. But the idea then becomes that they could say, I think Glaucon says, like, well, why don't these guys just, they've seen the light, it's outside, it's amazing, why would they go back in the cave? And Socrates says, this isn't about them. This is about society. Society has worked very hard to make them to get them to this stage, and it's their duty to come back into the cave because they have the Enlightenment and to use that to govern society. Okay.
So in this formulation, we've got our cave, right? Isn't that the philosopher king?
Is that the what?
Is the person holding the shadow of this?
Oh, the philosopher king. I wouldn't have thought so, no.
Well, because philosophy, like Plato's whole thing is that if you are expressing these forms in language, you're lying. You're creating a representation, right? Plato's creating the representation. He's creating the allegory. He's creating the shadows.
Oh, I see. The philosopher king may be making mythology for
Yeah, and
like the noble lies or something.
yeah, the noble lies.
Oh,
like
okay.
if we think of that idea of the noble lies, then in the cave analogy, the philosopher king is the captor. Essentially, the person who makes the shadows.
Yeah, I never thought of that. It could be. I tell you, I'm just going to present one more thing here that I think is really important, and then let's have a discussion to finish off. And the important thing I want to say here that people really mess up on is with this two world stuff is that the analogy is imperfect and Plato says it's imperfect. Right? And the analogy is imperfect because you've got the fire, right, creating the appearances, right? And then you've got the sun and the forms, and they seem to be separate. But there's a couple of places, and I'll just, if you want to note them down, 516b and 517b. I hope they're right. That's right. And here he makes it very clear that it is the sun that is the sun, the form of the good, that is generating the appearances as well as the appearance of the forms. And so I'll just read that out, one of these out. Then finally, he will be able to see the sun. I think not its reflection in water or even on any other surface, but by itself alone in its proper place, and he will be able to contemplate what kind of a thing it is. And straight after this, he'll be able to infer about it, and that this is what provides the seasons and the years and governs everything in the visible world. This is what governs everything in the visible world, and is somehow responsible for all those things which they themselves used to see, when they were sitting chained up. So it's an imperfect analogy, right? Please take that on board, because what he's really like the fire in a way is in the place of the sun, but it's not. It works because you're in this cave, and then you go through this process which you see described in Plotinus and other places, which is this retreat. Well, we can even just quote Plato from the Phaedo. When the soul inquires alone by itself, it departs from the realm of the pure, When the soul inquires alone by itself, it departs into the realm of the pure, the everlasting, the immortal, and the changeless. And being akin to these, it dwells always with them whenever it is by itself, unhindered, at rest from its wanderings. This state is called wisdom, is it not so? So you get in various places in Plato and then in Platonism where like a meditation, where you retreat from your sensible, objectified world into, it's an inward retreat, we think of it, into an insight, and in that insight, you get the enlightenment. And so in my view, that's very much what's being described here. Something different is being described in the divided line, the structure of reality, and if we get onto it, might get onto it next week because we're running out of time, the different levels of knowledge. Okay.
What was the second reference you mentioned?
I think it's 517b. I'm always worried.
517b, is it?
Yeah.
Okay, so and what was that one? What does that one say?
It says, oh, okay, the part that's relevant, it goes to, but this is how things appear to me. In the knowable region, the form of the good is last among the things perceived. and is seen
Yeah.
with difficulty. But once seen, then this is to be reckoned as the origin of all.
Yeah.
That is right and good for everyone. It gives birth to light and the source of life in the visible world. In the world of the intelligible, it is the very thing which gives truth. So quite clearly, he's saying the intelligible world, but also the visible world. So it is an imperfect analogy, and a lot of people down through history, especially critics, right? Critics of Plato, don't recognize that.
So the fire inside the cave is the sun. That's
Yeah, in a way, yeah,
So
yeah.
The cave is like,
The light source.
no, you have the sun and then you have sun likeness. It's
Okay.
discussed all throughout Plato's essay, the idea of you have the good, and then the philosopher king's role is to create something good like. So the fire is the good like.
Oh, that's an interesting.
Okay.
So then.
And then the philosopher king is
The
carrying the.
philosopher's king is like role is to create this good likeness, the fire, to
Yeah.
kindle the fire and to make the fire as strong as possible. Because I mean, Plato has this kind of apathy around enlightenment, or not apathy, what's the other one? Like he doesn't believe that everyone
Exactly.
will pursue enlightenment or will achieve it. So he thinks that the philosopher king has to kindle that fire in order to structure society around everyone getting as close to the sun as possible.
I've never
I
heard.
think the key there is
It's amazing.
the philosopher king was some kind of divine sage, which
Well,
is a very
We
different
were
way of looking at it.
discussing last week on the tram, we were talking about how it's kind of like in Buddhism, they have the Bodhisattva.
Yeah.
It's like a godlike figure
Yeah.
who can achieve nirvana, but chooses to go back down. Literally the same thing
Yeah.
that Plato is saying, chooses to go back down to the earthly realm to express it to the people there to help them achieve, except that's the difference. The Bodhisattva is aiming to help others achieve enlightenment,
Mm.
whereas Plato's going, they're not going to do that.
Okay.
So we're just going to make the fire and
Okay, that's very interesting. I just fill in with I haven't seen this and heard this interpretation before. It's a very interesting interpretation. Just that mention that not everyone can be a philosopher. This is also
it's the ability they just don't take the call.
well, maybe not, because on 494A he says it's impossible for most folks to be philosophers. He actually says that. And so this is why you need to have these philosophers up there, the people with the philosopher talent or whatever, to be then trained and to be the Dalai Lama type figure, and because most of these people couldn't possibly be philosophers as well. And this gets to Leo Strauss's interpretation, which says that he says that, you have to create all these lies and everything because not everyone can be enlightened. And so really this society isn't, it's all propaganda and the society can't live in the light of the truth. So lots of complications, but very good idea.
This is looking as though, I mean, this like philosopher king as kind of divine sage and verging on the demiurge in the Timaeus.
Almost. I mean,
Okay.
it's a theocracy. So
It is a theocracy, isn't it? That's
Yeah.
right. It's a theocracy.
Is it attested anywhere in Plato's writing that this that the torchbearer is the philosopher king, or is it just a like?
well, it's just like the implication and also what he says about what the philosopher king does.
Is there a torchbearer in text, or does it just?
It's just part of the broader idea of the metaphor. I don't know.
People who walk up and down the
Yeah.
pathway.
Yes.
Not holding torches.
But
holding
images.
images.
And they could be
It
guardians.
does
I think.
mention the operators, like a screen at the puppet show between the operators and their audience. So the operator is the government.
Look, I think the important thing here is that it's not stated explicitly, this interpretation, but I think it's an interesting interpretation worth considering, definitely. So thank you for that.
Before
Jim?
Jim came up with that, when I was listening to you, for some reason what came to mind were the first two chapters of Genesis where they talk about different lights. you know, like in the first one. I'm going to reread it. We can talk about it next week.
It's
But
already
then-
come up today.
Hmm?
Genesis has already come up today,
Yeah.
yeah, with Augustine. Yeah.
Because, yeah, God created light and darkness, but then in Genesis 2, he creates a different form of light and day and night, light and dark. It's kind
Oh,
of
so
two, yeah.
what I was quoting there, so that actually relates to what Norman's criticism
I'll go on
of.
Genesis 1.
And
Yeah.
oh,
No,
Quite
it's
different
mostly
from
that.
the way that
all right, so maybe
Because
it's
people,
chapter 2,
yeah, no, people often say that first part of Genesis
Yeah.
looks like it's come from two different sources.
That's right.
Yeah, that's right.
One's
All
the
right.
sun and one's beyond the sun. No.
Okay, let's have you guys have a look at that, and maybe we can come back to it next week. Now, I've just noticed the time, and we've still got Alan there. So as usual, I'm sorry we've run over. I usually try to stop on 8. I'll just say that so next week we'll go over this a little bit more. There's a little bit more to reveal about this, and there definitely is more to discuss about the cave. So we can get onto it next week, but then next week we move on to this program of education that he's going to put in place. Start with arithmetic, then he goes back to 1. What is the 1? The 1 is this 1 that also has none nearby it. What's all that about? And then we move on to it. From arithmetic, we go up the degrees. It's like the degrees of equations in your physics. And then we get to astronomy. And then we get to music. And then there's something much more important than all of this. Dialectic. And he explains what it is. So that's going to be lots of fun next week, as well as more discussion about the cave. But we can continue discussing about the cave now and anything else. I'm just going to turn the recording off, and do stay on, Alan, if you want to, and Karen, of course.
Can I just, Bernie,